A Captain and a Madman by RazielZonoran. Interlude 2. Soran's mad plans had failed, the desperate El Orion killed in the explosion of his own missile. The solar system was saved, millions of lives spared annihilation from their own sun, but at what cost? Picard's limbs ached as he scurried down the rocky incline, deeper into the canyon, not daring to hope, but not wanting to admit what had likely transpired. Kirk had succeeded, he knew that much, had gotten to the remote that had decloaked Soran's platform, had made this victory possible, but, the sound that had followed, the crumble of stone and screech of metal. Picard hadn't seen what had happened, had been too focused, far too focused, on preventing the launch of that missile to witness it, and that lack of sight had given him hope. After all, Kirk had already thwarted death outright, survived seemingly impossible odds by coming back after being lost on the Enterprise B, years and parsecs from this lifeless rock. Every hopeful thought in Jean-Luc's mind prayed that Kirk had leapt free somehow, or ridden the catwalk down to the bottom, perhaps thrown himself onto a higher ledge before it finished its plunge. But when Picard saw the twisted catwalk at the bottom of the canyon, and a glimpse of a white uniform beneath it, those hopes died. Still, Picard hurried forward, tugging away a piece of debris, peering inside, and finding Kirk, bloodied, broken, but alive, pinned beneath the bulk of the catwalk. The former captain of the Enterprise was still conscious, still aware of his surroundings, and when he saw Picard looking down at him, he blinked dazedly. "Did we do it?" Kirk murmured, brow furrowed, eyes narrowed against the pain, voice soft and yet almost pleading. "Did we make a difference?" "Oh, yes," Picard replied breathlessly, still half hoping he could find some means to get Kirk out safely. "We made a difference. Thank you. Least I could do, for the captain of the Enterprise." Kirk's eyes flickered, for just a moment, as he added, "It was fun." Kirk's head turned a little, smiling at Picard as if sharing some private joke, but Picard couldn't quite find it in himself to smile back. And then, the smile faded, bit by bit, the expression that replaced it a quiet mix of awe, and perhaps fear. Oh my. They were his last words, and those narrowed eyes soon saw no more. Picard knelt there, for a good long time, unable to look away from Kirk's body, unable even to climb to his feet, as if thinking if he left that body unguarded, something would steal it away. His reverie, his long, silent vigil, was broken when a sudden skitter of scattered pebbles sounded from above, causing the captain to spin around, body tensing for an attack. Only to find a very recognizable figure, standing above him on an outcrop of rock, with an even more familiar blue box behind him. "You." Dazed and in more than a little pain, it took a moment for Picard to dredge the name from years past. "Doctor." "Yes." The doctor's eyes flickered to Kirk's body, a small sigh passing his lips. "I'm sorry. I really am. But I need you to come with me. I need your help." "Yes, well." Picard's lips thinned, jaw setting as he turned back towards Kirk, kneeling to curl his fingers under the bottom rim of the fallen catwalk. "To hell with what you need. I don't intend to leave him here like this." The captain gave a strangled groan as he tried to haul the catwalk away, but he had been through too much in the last couple of hours, and he was a sore, stiff mess, bordering on dehydration and covered in more than a few cuts and bruises. His first few attempts brought nothing but pained grunts as the catwalk didn't even twitch at the Starfleet officer's exhausted efforts. "Captain," the doctor said gently, starting to descend towards Picard. "A rescue shuttle will be here. It will take you too long to build a proper cairn for him yourself, it won't give us enough time to talk." "So, what?" Picard snapped without even glancing back, even as he gave the catwalk another hard pull. He groaned as his sore, battered muscles protested the strain, the words coming in choked gasps. "You're saying I should just leave him here, then?" The catwalk shuddered and squealed, but refused to move, Picard's teeth gritting as he hauled with all his strength. And then, suddenly, it began to lift upward, off of Kirk's battered body. Staggering when the load lightened, Picard glanced to find the doctor beside him, jacket removed, his own hands clamped to the catwalk's railings, teeth bared from the strain as he helped drag it to one side. "I'm not saying, I'm asking," the doctor corrected gently as they set it down, and Picard was more than a little surprised to see tears beating in the Time Lord's eyes. "I'm asking you to let me help. Dash 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 dash." With both of them working together, it didn't very long to bring Kirk's body somewhere a little more appropriate, and to build a cairn of stones around it. The doctor had spoken quietly throughout, telling him the fate of Picard's Enterprise, but assuring him that most of his crew had survived the saucer section's crash. Both were covered in dust and bruises by the time they had finished, the doctor settling onto a rock to catch his breath. The sun had just begun to dip across the horizon as Picard set Kirk's Starfleet emblem on the top of the cairn, stepping away and taking a moment of silence for the fallen officer. Finally, Picard drew in a slow breath, glancing at the doctor. "Thank you. It was the least I could do," the doctor replied quietly, his eyes still on the cairn. "I don't like to be in anyone's debt." Picard couldn't help but notice the look on the Time Lord's face as he stared at the cairn, something that suggested familiarity. "I take it you met him once." The doctor sighed softly, dusting off his hands as he climbed back to his feet, retrieving his jacket. "A long time ago, at least from his perspective. It was only a brief meeting, a single conversation, but it was enough to give me some idea as to why they told so many stories about him. He caught me on his ship, red-handed, and in the end chose to release me, on the word of his first officer and nothing else. Good man, one who listens to their friends. I doubt he would have remembered me, at least not as anything but a brief, frustrating curiosity." "It's a feeling I can relate to," Picard replied numbly, and the doctor gave a little snort in reply, the tiniest of smiles. "I deserved that, I imagine." Picard's jaw tightened a little as his head turned to consider the Time Lord. "You knew this was going to happen. You must have, if you knew where to find me. The Enterprise's fate, Kirk's fate. Couldn't you have done something, come sooner, helped us against Soran's plans, prevented the destruction of the Enterprise? Couldn't you at least have saved Kirk?" The captain's voice rose steadily with each moment, and though he wasn't quite shouting at the end of it, he did step closer to the Time Lord, eyes glimmering with scarcely repressed anger. All the frustration, the fear and violence of the past couple of hours had driven Picard into a corner. The news that the Enterprise, his ship, his home for nearly a decade, had been destroyed was almost more than he could bear. The doctor, for his part, met the human's gaze levelly, not flinching, but not defiant either. In fact, he looked slightly ashamed. "Actually, I considered it," the doctor finally admitted, hands sliding in his pockets as he glanced at the ground. "When I first saw what had happened here, first read the report, I considered changing it. But unfortunately, there are factions out there that would rather I keep the timeline intact, and they would have taken whatever steps were necessary to ensure it. Ironically, they're your very own people, a number of centuries ahead of you. Surely you heard about what happened to the Alcharan colony soon after our intervention." Picard nodded, head tilting. "Yes, I heard about the asteroid strike. It was a tragedy, but are you saying?" "Unfortunately, yes," the doctor replied, shaking his head. "They were responsible for the colony's destruction. Like cutting away a limb to prevent some perceived infection from spreading. If I had intervened, saved the Enterprise, even saved Kirk, they would have done everything in their power to reverse it. Even if it meant killing him with their own hands. They could very well have ended up doing more damage in the process than has already been done. I'm sorry, Captain, but it's not a risk I could take. I'm here because this is one of the very few times in the years to come that I could visit you without anyone knowing. I imagine your own Starfleet would still love to get their hands on me, and your technology is capable of detecting my TARDIS's arrival." "I see." Picard seemed a little mollified at that, or at least he took the doctor at his word. "I'm sorry. My words, they were uncalled for." "As am I," the Time Lord replied, his eyes drifting along the landscape. "And they weren't." Giving Kirk's cairn another long look, he finally sighed and gestured towards the TARDIS. "Well, come on, then. We should be underway before the rescue shuttle arrives. I trust you'll be able to return me here without drawing undue notice." "Well, Captain, please," Picard interjected softly, holding up a hand to cut off the doctor. "Jean-Luc." The doctor actually gave a full smile at that, teeth and everything. "Thank you. Well, Jean-Luc, I can guarantee I'll get you back on the planet's surface less than a minute after you left." "Good," Jean-Luc murmured as they reached the TARDIS's doors, slumping against the box as he took a moment to catch his breath. "But precisely what is it you need from me?" "Well," the doctor murmured, wincing as pushed the doors open, laughing nervously. I need to know everything you can tell me about the Borg. Chapter 14. Stranger Shores. Are you insane? The Doctor and Picard had quickly boarded the TARDIS, with the former vaulting up to the control console to get them underway before the Federation rescue ships entered sensor range of the planet. No need to have his departure noticed, after all. Even as the Doctor was preparing a random course, the captain of the now crashed Enterprise was right behind him, looking a bizarre combination of furious and almost frightened. What? No. The Time Lord paused, as if seriously considering it, before shrugging. Well, possibly. Rather subjective concept, when you think about it. Picard's mouth opened and shut several times before he got back on track, grabbing the railing as the TARDIS shuddered in departure. The Borg are an implacable enemy, Picard insisted, stepping up behind him, one that excels in adaptation as well as assimilation. They pilfer the skills and knowledge of those they've converted, as well as their technology. If you were to be taken by them, assimilated into their collective, all you've ever known, everything of which you are capable would become theirs to use as they please. Oh, no, the Doctor replied, even as he tugged one of his hanging monitors over. Goodness knows the galaxy would be terrorized if the Borg gained my cricket skills. Doctor. Captain, the Doctor said, whirling around and correcting himself as he rested a hand on the human's shoulder, Jean-Luc. I understand your concerns, but believe me when I say that giving all I am to the Borg is the very last thing on my mind. I'm not that irresponsible. Well, not usually. But I've thought this through, in great and varied detail, and this is the only way. Any other being who could tell me what I need to know is beyond my ability to contact, let alone coerce. Picard scowled a little, his head shaking slowly, as the Doctor turned his attention back to the monitor. While he had to admit that the Time Lord did appear brilliant, and powerful in many ways, Jean-Luc knew better than most just how unrelenting and insidious the Borg could be, and the stakes involved, the risk of what would happen if the Time Lord were to be assimilated, was obscene. The Borg would, in all likelihood, become unstoppable, and the Doctor's great skill and knowledge could prove to be countered by his overwhelming arrogance, deserved or no. I am concerned that you are underestimating the Borg, he finally said. Such overconfidence could prove fatal, for all of us. That's why I need you here, the Doctor replied, even as he called up a new file, frowning pensively at it as he reached behind to blindly pat Picard on the shoulder. You are one of the foremost authorities on the Borg, the foremost authority in your time frame, and have a keen tactical mind that shall be invaluable. You also have a healthy appreciation for how dangerous these Borg are, something I'm admittedly lacking. Don't judge, they just seem like uglier Cybermen to me, and that's saying something. Finally, you're a very recognizable and skilled officer, which is certainly going to come in handy. How flattering, Picard replied irritably, trying to get a look at the files, but they seem to be encoded. Exactly what are you doing? Finding the next set of authorities, the Doctor replied distractedly, before glancing back at Picard. You should get some rest. You can find some bedrooms up that passage over there, 5th corridor on your left. No, thank you, Picard replied tersely. I'm fine. Ah, always on duty, the Time Lord chuckled softly, before gesturing downward distractedly with one hand. Go, seriously. I need some more time to review these records before I do anything rash, and you've tumbled down a mountain twice today. Get some sleep. Nothing dangerous or exciting will happen beforehand. Picard was about to protest again, but it was cut off by, of all things, a yawn. After the last handful of hours, the fact that he was out of imminent danger was indeed having an almost soporific effect on him, and as much as he wanted to deny it, he could feel his tired muscles begging for some rest. Still, a second protest was halfway out his lips before another yawn ripped through him, this one loud and wide, until, flushing, Picard relented. Very well. Starting to slowly move towards the indicated corridor, Picard turned back, no thoughts of confronting the Borg until I return. Cross my hearts. Both of them. Grunting at that, Picard finally surrendered altogether, climbing the second staircase in search of some rest. Dash 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 dash. Picard had no idea how long he slept. The room he'd found was of fair size, equipped with a double bed, hairbrush, some knick-knacks and spare clothing. Considering some of the clothing clearly belonged to a woman, Picard had been initially curious as to who else had been aboard, but fatigue had quickly laid those questions to rest, and he passed out still in his rumpled and dust-streaked uniform. When he awoke, he felt better rested, but there was still a dull ache throughout his stiff, sore body, and a fainter pain in the pit of his stomach. Too much had happened in the last few days for him to simply dismiss. The loss of his brother and nephew still weighed heavily on him. Still, he wasn't going to languish in bed all day, and wasted no time in returning to the control room. He was quite surprised, upon arriving, to see that it appeared empty. The doctor's familiar jacket was draped over the back of a chair, but the man himself was nowhere to be found. Some faint hissing drew his attention, however, and Picard descended to the bottom level. The doctor, he soon realized, was indeed in the room, but instead of being at the controls, he sat in a harness in the dimly lit space underneath, fiddling with tubes, wires and innumerable items. His suspenders had been tugged off his shoulders, and the hiss of something that sounding like a welder mingled with his cheery hum as glowing sparks tumbled lazily to the ground. As Picard descended the last staircase, the Time Lord paused in his work to peer at the human, looking like some bizarre raccoon due to a pair of round, black goggles that obscured his eyes from view. Morning. The doctor paused for a moment before shrugging, tugging the goggles down around his neck and glancing at his wristwatch as he stood up. Well, afternoon. Evening-ish. You slept like a stone. Did I? Picard asked, blinking as he rubbed at his scalp. Surprising. Not at all, the doctor countered, his attention wandering back to the underbelly of the console. The hum of the TARDIS, better than a mug of warm milk and honey. Picard didn't really know what to say in response to that, and so remained silent as the doctor finished whatever he had been doing, connecting wires here and there, sonicking a few spots, and then tugging his suspenders back into place. Giving his screwdriver a quick flipping toss and then tucking it into his pocket, he wiped at his forehead with the back of his hand and stepped past the Starfleet officer with a friendly smile and a pat on the shoulder in passing. So, Picard finally said, following him back up the stairs to the controls, what did I miss? Oh, not much, the doctor replied idly, tugging his jacket back on before adding, I mean, there are a few Borg drones aboard somewhere, they slipped away when I ignored your advice. What? Kidding. Grinning at the decidedly unamused glower on the captain's face, the doctor flipped a lever, sending the TARDIS into a shuddering, grinding whir through time and space. In all seriousness, I've been waiting for you to wake up before I started our journey. We're not off to anywhere dangerous, mind you, not yet. I'd considered paying the El-Orians a visit during their assimilation by the Borg, but considering both Soran and Guinan were present there, would have been a temporal quagmire. Picard's mouth curled a little at the mention of Soran, and he reflected that it probably was fortunate they weren't going to that time period. He might not have been able to resist the urge to throttle the El-Orian scientist. Where are we going, then? Temporally speaking, not very far, the doctor replied. Quite a distance spatially, though, by Federation standards at least. The cloister bell sounded a moment later, announcing their arrival. Slipping past Picard, the doctor threw open the doors, revealing the black void of space beyond it. Even though he knew the Time Lord wasn't suicidal, Jean-Luc couldn't help but flinch when the opening was made, as if half expecting to be sucked out into space. Even after all this time, he sometimes forgot that this odd box was just as advanced, if not more so, than any Federation ship of the line. Well, where do you think we are? The doctor asked, moving past Picard and towards the other end of the control room. Stepping up to the opening a bit nervously, Picard stood at the very edge, marveling that he could see no sign of a force field, no indication that there was anything but empty space ahead of him, aside from the lack of death, of course. Well, Picard said slowly, we seem to be in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely, middle of nowhere, the doctor agreed cheerfully, his voice echoing slightly and mingling with rustling as he searched a large box on the far side of the room. But we're not the only ones out in this particular middle. No, there's a ship out there, and by now they've no doubt detected our arrival, much as your ship did on our first encounter. They're probably en route, might even have dropped out of warp by now. And then the doctor was there in a flash, bustling past the Starfleet officer with a cylindrical tube in one hand. As he reached the open doors, he gave the tube a flick with his wrist, expanding it into a long spyglass, tongue pressing to the corner of his mouth. The Time Lord held it up to his eye and peered through one end, humming under his breath. To Picard, there seemed to be nothing but stars, stars and yet more stars. There she is, the doctor announced, nearly making Picard jump. Beautiful. There what is? Picard asked, squinting at the starscape but still unable to see anything. The doctor soundlessly offered the spyglass, which Picard accepted and lifted to his own eye. The Time Lord's hand moved to gently tilt the other end of the scope, helping to angle it properly, and before he knew it, Jean-Luc saw her, a ship, seemingly motionless against the backdrop of stars. She was a Starfleet vessel, that much was clear by her design, but the configuration didn't look like anything with which he was familiar. Picard wasn't certain what was more surprising, the ship's appearance, or the powerful magnification of the seemingly primitive spyglass. He couldn't even have begun to guess how far away that ship was, and yet every detail was clear, even though there wasn't any nearby sun to offer the necessary ambient light. He almost considered asking about the spyglass design, then decided he wasn't likely to get a useful answer. I am unfamiliar with the ship class. Picard finally noted instead, frowning slightly. Well, they were a fairly new design in your time period, the doctor replied. We're a handful of years in the future, by the way, but to be specific, that vessel is an Intrepid class. Intrepid class. Picard's eyes narrowed, just a little as he lowered the spyglass. Ah, yes, I do remember reading a report on the new commissions. In fact, one of them went out of contact during a mission in the Badlands last month, during her maiden voyage, I believe. USS Voyager, that's the one out there, the doctor replied cheerfully, drawing a curious look from Picard. I take it she was recovered, then. No. The doctor paused. Well, yes. Sort of. Eventually. It's a rather long story, you'll find out soon enough, but in the meantime. They know we're here, they're probably sitting there wondering what a wooden box is doing in the middle of space. No doubt looking at us on their viewscreen, but I'd say they're keeping a distance of 1 billion kilometers. Not close enough to see us clearly on their fanciful viewscreen. But any minute now they'll probably. The doctor's phone began to ring. Ha! The Time Lord gave Picard a cheerful pat on the back before climbing up to the control console. Love you Starfleet types, always ask questions first and shoot later. Except for that one unpleasant Brit I met a day ago, but oh, I'll tell you about it later. Snatching the phone off the hook, he pressed it to his ear, holding it in place with his shoulder as he operated the TARDIS controls. Hello. Stepping up to the control console a bit more slowly, Picard couldn't hear the other end of the discussion, and had to settle for watching the Time Lord fiddle with a knob, even as he spoke as casually as if he was discussing the weather. Pleased to meet you, Mum, I've come a long way to have a talk. Yes, I'm aware that I'm in a blue box. No, quite fine, not in any danger, however, I would like to arrange a meeting of the minds, as it were, might I bring my ship aboard? No, your transporter won't be able to lock onto me. Oh, well, I understand your caution, but I do have someone here who can vouch for me. With that, he held the phone out to Picard, who just stared at it blankly. Well, the Time Lord asked. Well, Picard echoed. Vouch for me, the doctor said, brow lifted as he wiggled the phone slightly. Scowling a little, Picard accepted the phone and pressed it to his ear, leaning back when the doctor's head pressed nearly to Picard's shoulder so he could listen in. After an awkward moment of silence, Picard finally said, hello. To whom am I speaking to? The voice on the other end was female, authoritative, not exactly amused, either. This is Catherine Janeway, captain of the Federation starship Voyager. To whom am I speaking? I am Jean-Luc Picard, captain of. Picard paused, winced, and murmured a bit less certainly, the Federation starship Enterprise. The silence was engulfing at that, so much so that the doctor inched even closer, causing Picard to lift an elbow to fend him off. Excuse me if I don't take your word for it, Captain, but it's a little surprising to find the commanding officer of the Federation flagship out here, without his ship, in the middle of the Delta Quadrant. Picard's eyes widened at that, and he snapped a glance at the doctor, who just shrugged sheepishly and mouthed a reminder, long story. I realize that this is highly unusual, Captain Janeway, Picard finally responded, for both of us, I assure you, but I am Jean-Luc Picard, and I will subject myself to any test you require to prove my identity. My identification code is Picard 47 Theta, but I'm a few years behind the times, apparently, and I can't be certain it's still valid. My presence here is due entirely to an entity that should have been among your initial briefings when you took command, the doctor. There was another pause, the telltale click of the other end's audio being muted, likely discussing the issue amongst themselves. When the transmission resumed, Janeway's voice was a little uncertain, tinged with both suspicion and concern. Are you a captive? No, not at all, Picard replied firmly. I am here of my own free will, though I am admittedly uncertain as to why I am here. Captain, I should tell you now, due to the Temporal Prime Directive, I would appreciate if you would refrain from mentioning anything you might know of me following the loss of the Enterprise D. If what you're telling me is true, Janeway pointed out a bit wryly, your being here makes that a moot point. Quite. Nonetheless, in the interest of minimizing the damage. All right. Are you telling me I should allow this doctor's ship aboard? Well, Picard said, glancing sideways at the doctor, who was still all but on top of him. I assure you that the doctor very much wishes a face-to-face meeting, and I am willing to vouch for him, if you will accept my word. Permission to come aboard. Very well, Janeway finally replied, after the briefest hesitation. Permission granted. Given the readings we're getting from over there, we're not sure we can get a transporter lock. Would you like us to tractor you in? Before Picard could even answer, the doctor made several grabbing motions and finally snatched the phone back, nearly taking Picard's hand in the process. I can bring my ship aboard yours, Mum, the doctor chirped, then blinked at the response, clearing his throat as he gestured for Picard to shut the TARDIS doors. Right, Captain. Sorry. In any case, do you want me to park on the bridge? Mess hall. Holodeck. Shuttle bay. Wonderful. Never seen one of those before, right? Be there in a tick. Hanging the phone up with great gusto, the doctor began to zip about the control room as Picard moved to close the doors as asked. If he'd had to guess from the Time Lord's behavior, Jean-Luc would have wondered if maybe the doctor had been waiting quite specifically for Jean-Luc to wake up before undertaking this journey, and, given how much the doctor seemed to dislike waiting, he was clearly just a bundle of excited impatience by now. That impatience did raise one question. Doctor, Picard said, as the Time Lord scurried about the control panel, making minute adjustments to accomplish the relatively delicate hop. If you had a record of Voyager's position, could you not have simply brought us directly aboard their vessel? This all seemed a bit of an indirect way to gain their attention. Oh, absolutely, the doctor replied, pausing just long enough to give Picard a grin as the time rotor began to grind to life. But I'm just a little tired of having phasers pointed at me, and I know you lot have a record on me after my first visit. Besides, I'm actually counting on their cooperation as much as I am yours, so I wanted to make a positive first impression. It's part of the reason I brought you. I thought having the legendary Jean-Luc Picard might keep me from getting stuck in the brig. Anything else he might have said was interrupted as the cloister bell sounded, announcing their arrival. Half dashing, half sauntering down the stairs and across the room to the front doors, the doctor flung them open and started to step out, only to freeze in place when he saw the welcome that awaited him. There were a handful of Starfleet personnel, Captain Janeway, her chief of security, Tuvok, and 4 additional security personnel, arranged in a loose semicircle around the entrance to the TARDIS. The former 2 didn't exactly look welcoming. The latter 4 were all aiming phasers in the Time Lord's direction. The doctor sighed, and lifted his hands slowly, muttering under his breath as he slowly exited the TARDIS. So much for that plan. Raising his voice as he stepped out to call back to Picard, close the door on your way out, will you? Dash 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 dash. 1 tea, Earl Grey, hot, and 1 coffee, black. Picard sat in front of Captain Catherine Janeway's desk in her ready room, shifting a bit restlessly in his seat as he frowned, scarcely paying attention as Voyager's CO brought a pair of mugs from the replicator, even though he was the one who'd requested the tea. It wasn't until the strong aroma hit his nostrils that he glanced up, murmuring a brief thank you as he accepted the offered cup, his gaze now studying Janeway quite shrewdly as she settled into her own seat across from him. It had taken less than an hour to get everything sorted out. Well, more or less. The doctor had been quite promptly whisked away to the brig, despite Picard's protests and the Time Lord's very vocal complaints every step out of the shuttle bay. The captain of the Enterprise, such as it was, had been himself brought straight to sickbay, where he'd been subjected to a thorough examination by a balding doctor with a rather abrasive bedside manner. Scans had been performed, blood and tissue samples had been taken, all while Picard had answered a steady stream of questions relating to his career and history, even going so far as to discuss Boothby, a mutual friend of both cuz during their respective academy years. Finally, he had been cleared conditionally by the holographic doctor, who had assured Janeway that the man was physically human, matched Picard's genetic profile, even had his artificial heart, but that he still wanted to check for any signs of brainwashing or other neurological tampering. He didn't believe that Picard was a threat, however, and so he wasn't placed in confinement. Still, a guard was waiting just outside, ready in case anything went wrong. Also, the alien doctor was still being kept in the brig, for the time being at least. "I'm sorry for the cold welcome," Janeway noted a bit wryly, even as she brought both mugs over. "We encountered a cell operated by a race we referred to as Species 8472 last year. They were training to impersonate key Starfleet officers, in preparation for a covert infiltration of Earth. We talked them out of their plan, but we couldn't be sure you weren't something similar, not until our doctor confirmed it." "Not to worry, Captain," Picard replied, smiling briefly as he lifted his mug to take a sip. "I well imagine I'd be taking the same precautions, in your place. However, as for my doctor's current accommodations, I do have to ask if it's really necessary." "Well," Janeway replied, head tilting curiously, considering what's on record about him, and that official procedure on encountering this doctor is to have him stunned and thoroughly sedated, I think I'm being fairly generous. I'm surprised, actually, that you're speaking out in his defense. Wasn't it your ship he broke out of?" Picard actually bristled a little at that, his eyes narrowing minutely as he leaned back in his seat. "It really wasn't so simple as that. Wasn't it?" Picard was just about to explain, rather sharply, the entire mess, but he froze, mouth open. The fact that the Enterprise and her crew had avoided difficulties with Starfleet Command following the Time Lord's escape had been the illusion that said escape hadn't been knowingly aided by any of her officers. To simply admit that they had indeed allowed, even facilitated, the Doctor's escape, could have consequences. As frustrating as it was not to be able to speak openly, he decided he would have to keep that one secret close to his chest. It was, therefore, a bit of a surprise when Janeway's lifted brow and stern frown suddenly melted into a small, knowing smile. "You aren't the first captain to bend the rules," she said quietly. "And if you are Jean-Luc Picard and aren't brainwashed, then I think I can trust your judgment. Still, I was CO of the Billings when you encountered him. We were only a few sectors from the Enterprise when he escaped. Spent 3 weeks scanning asteroid fields and nebulae for a blue wooden box, all while being told that the man in it had acted against the Federation, had outright attacked the flagship's captain and taken him hostage." "Well," Picard admitted a bit sheepishly, hands spreading, palms upwards. "He did, admittedly, hold a phaser to my head. But it was my idea. And I'm willing to believe that," Janeway replied. "I just want my doctor to finish his analysis before we do anything else." Picard drew in a long breath, then let it out in a whoosh of air before nodding. "You mentioned," he finally broached, seeking a less confrontational topic, "that we are in the Delta Quadrant. Perhaps it's wise I not ask for the specific details as to how you traveled so far, but might I ask for how long you've been here?" "Over 6 years," Janeway replied, eyes flickering slightly with some undefinable emotion. "It's been a long journey, but we've made tremendous strides in that time. And I think it would be safe to tell you that coming here wasn't our choice, we're actually just trying to get back home." If anything, this topic struck Picard as an even worse one, and he shifted in his chair a little, using a long sip at his mug of tea to buy him a moment to consider what she had said, and just what he should tell her in reply. "Captain," he said slowly, thinking it best to settle the matter here and now, "these circumstances are a bit uncomfortable, for both of us, I would imagine. As far as anyone in my time period is concerned, Voyager is still out of contact, and I am concerned with what would happen were I to return to my time and divulge." "Actually," she interjected, chuckling a little to set him at ease, "I do understand. Temporal Prime Directive, and you'd be surprised how many times I've run into it these past years. For what it's worth, we maintain regular contact with Earth now, thanks to some ingenious work on both sides. And although I have sometimes considered trying to find some way to undo what's happened, to change things, these past years have a lot that I wouldn't want to give up. A lot of civilizations we've helped, and a lot of individuals. 7, for 1. 7. Picard smiled a little, confused. A curious name. One of your crew members. Yes, Janeway replied a bit distantly, still distracted with her own thoughts. She came aboard a couple of years ago, when we liberated her from the Borg Collective. Her musings continued for a moment or two longer before she realized that Picard hadn't spoken again. Refocusing, she looked up at him, to find him frozen in place, his mug of tea lifted halfway towards his lips, his expression all but etched in stone and his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and revulsion. It was then Janeway belatedly remembered Picard's own pioneering encounters with the Borg, and wondered how she possibly could have forgotten. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes widening, "I should have been more delicate about." "No," Picard interjected, clearing his throat and holding up a hand, trying to give her a comforting smile as he set his mug of tea back down. "Please, you don't need to apologize, I was just caught off guard. In fact, it's certainly welcome news to hear that someone has been freed of their influence, to say nothing for the feat it must have taken to secure her in the first place. Might I ask how it came about?" Janeway shifted in her chair a bit, now feeling a little uncomfortable herself. Considering her fellow captain's abduction, assimilation and subjugation under the thumb of the collective, she realized she wasn't thrilled about recounting the tale of how she had deliberately sought to forge an alliance, however temporary, with them. Without much alternative, and certainly with no intention of deceiving him, she cleared her throat and pressed on. "Well, it started when we reached the edge of Borg-occupied space.